Hello and thank you so much for watching my video. My name is Caitlin. I love to read. I am a longtime lurker, first-time poster in the YouTube reading community, and I am so excited to get on here and talk to you guys about the books that I read, tell you my thoughts, and hopefully hear yours as well. Today for my first post, I want to go into 5 recent fantasy books I've read, talk to you about them, give you a little synopsis in case you haven't read them or you're interested, and then give you my thoughts and minimal spoiler thoughts on the book. I'm going to start with my least favorite, which is kind of a hot take. I think my first 2 books I'm going to discuss are kind of hot takes. The first book I want to talk about is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries. This book follows Emily Wilde, who is a socially awkward Cambridge professor, and she's kind of a pioneer in her field, which is dryadology. She studies fairies. And so we follow her as she is trying to create this first encyclopedia of fairies ever written. She has traveled all over the world searching for fairies, researching them, and writing, her findings down. And she's in the last leg of her trip when we start our journey with her. She's heading to a remote Scandinavian village called Hraefsvik. May not be pronounced like that, I'm not sure. So her and her dog Shadow get into this remote village, and right off the bat, she just kind of offends them. She is somebody who is very shy and she's not really good with people. But because the townsfolk don't take a liking to her, she's having a hard time communicating with them and getting the information she needs to find the fae folk. So our journey follows her as she is struggling to survive the harsh climate, communicating with the people around her, and encountering malevolent fairies along the way. She at some point is joined by her colleague Wendell Bamblebee, who she views as sort of a rival. He is somebody who she thinks is lazy. He gets the students to do a lot of work for him, and she's worried that he's going to hop on the last leg of her trip and kind of take credit for some of her work. So she's very hesitant to have him there. She's not thrilled about it. And Wendell is somebody who is very charming. He's really flamboyant. He's a lot of fun, but he's also really mysterious. This story follows the characters from Emily's perspective in like a journal format. We see them gain trust in the community, we see them research the fae in the area, and then eventually develop a romantic relationship. So let's go ahead and talk about my thoughts. I'll start with things that I liked from this book, which include the setting. I really like the warm, cozy vibes that this book brought. It was like a little wintry town, very quaint, and the characters were really fleshed out, like the villagers, in a way that I thought that they were charming and likable. I liked the creatures. I really liked this one fairy they encounter named Poe, and their dog Shadow is really cute. And now let's talk about the things that I didn't like about this book, and truthfully, there were a lot. This is almost a DNF for me. I just felt like the writing was very verbose to the point of almost feeling pretentious. It seemed to move at like a glacial pace for me, and for a book that's only 300 pages, it just felt slow. It just felt like a very long book. I found myself drifting off and having to reread pages of this. 2, I didn't love Emily Wilde. I did not think that she was a very exciting main character. I didn't think that she was very relatable. She is somebody who is so socially awkward that it's the point of her being kind of rude to people, unkind, and just boring. I think that it was ridiculous that as a scientist, somebody who's going to these remote areas and relying so much on the people around you, she didn't look into any of the background of their culture, and she just offends them right off the bat. I also just don't love this trope that to be like a successful woman in science, you need to be an ice queen, and you just can't have a personality. Smart women are allowed to be nice and funny and interesting and still be good at their jobs. So I just thought that that was a trope that I wasn't psyched about. And then finally, the romance. I just didn't believe it. I don't know about you guys if you've read this book, but it just seemed like it came out of the blue. He was sleeping with girls in the town, and all of a sudden he's professing his love to her. Okay. Overall, I didn't love this book. I struggled to finish it. It was fine. I did eventually get through it. Okay, so 4th on my list, my 4th least favorite book, which is another very hot take, is Fourth Wing. And I know, everyone loves Fourth Wing. It is so popular. It's TikTok famous. It's got like a whopping 4.63 on Goodreads. But maybe it was just that I thought it was going to be so great and I was disappointed because of the hype. I'll tell you my thoughts, but basically, this book is about Violet Sorrengail, who is trying to become a dragon rider at a war college, which is a notoriously difficult task. Violet is from a famous family. Her mom is a general of like the army for the country, and her siblings were both war heroes. They were both dragon riders. But Violet, however, has always been kind of frail and sickly since birth. So she was going to follow in her father's footsteps and become a scribe, which is more of like the studious track where you're, basically working like a library of sorts. So unfortunately, Violet's father dies, and her mother decides that Violet is going to be a dragon rider, even though she was never kind of on that path. She was always trained to be a scribe. And this puts her at a huge physical disadvantage and also like a training disadvantage, since this is kind of a last minute decision. Violet is intimidated when she has to matriculate into this class because there are a lot of candidates and there are only a few dragons to bond with, so there's just tons of competition within the people her own age group who are trying to get into this class together. A lot of the obstacles that they face are fatal, and a lot of people die. She sees a lot of her classmates die through the challenges, so that's mentally very draining on her, as well as physically draining on her too. So in this story, we get to see her overcome these challenges, find new friendships, discover new sides of herself, and eventually find love. There are a lot of things that I liked about this book. I thought it was fun. I thought it was a lot of fun to read. I was like hooked from the get-go, and it was very gripping throughout. I love this idea of like a fantasy college where it's almost like Hunger Games style. You're fighting against the people that you're also becoming friends with. You have allies, you have enemies. And I love the dragons. They're cute, they're fun. What's not to like? Actually, I'll tell you what's not to like. The writing was really bad. The writing was awful. There were some points especially during her internal monologue about Satan, which is the love interest, where I was just rolling my eyes. And like, instead of going into depth about the world building and the lore and the history, she just recites history facts when she's stressed out. It was just like the weirdest way to put that into the story. Of course, it's important to know that background, but there's a better way to do it than that be like her fallback, like stress relieving tactic is just reciting history facts for the reader to know. It was silly. I also, gosh, don't even get me started. I'm sorry if you loved this book. I thought that Violet was the ultimate Mary Sue. Even though she was physically disadvantaged, she was like, they beat you over the head with the fact that she was so tiny and so frail and so delicate. She just had the coolest, most unique hairstyle. She had the most unprecedented, one-of-a-kind dragon situation, and it was so cool and unique. She had a power that hadn't been seen in centuries that was super badass, and she was just not like other girls. She's special. And just a side note, and this is like minimal spoilers, so fast forward if you don't want to hear it, but the horny dragon scene was so silly. The fact that their dragons, or two of the main characters' dragons, were having sex, and it made the characters feel so full of lust and like have these strong, crazy, unbearable, like horny feelings was such a silly plot point. It killed me. I just like imagine having that happen in other situations. Like, could you imagine like being in class and like your dragon has to take a huge dump and you're pooping your pants all of a sudden? It's stupid. Okay, next. Okay, so the next book is one that I actually really like. So this is my third book in the list of 5, and that is The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. I thought this book was great. This is a magical realism book that follows the titular character, June Farrow, as she is just kind of living with dread over this curse that's hanging over her head and that has affected all of the women in the Farrow family. And that is that they are slowly losing their mind. And so it's just this descent into madness that every single one of them has had. They know it's coming. So June lives in a small town with her grandmother, and they run this really prosperous flower farm. Her mother dropped her off as a baby, like in the middle of the street, out of the blue, and never was seen again. So her grandmother really is more of like a mother figure to her. She has been taking care of her grandmother and watching her kind of mentally decline over time until unfortunately she passes away. And so June is dealing with the grief of the loss of this important woman in her life. When we go to the funeral and we have the community kind of approach June, we find that June has already been having these visual and auditory hallucinations much younger than other family members. And so she knows it's coming, and she's very concerned for this. Now, the things that she's seeing, she starts to see this red door that comes up, and she tries to ignore it, but eventually she gives in and she goes to the red door and opens it, and she finds herself actually time travel back to 1951. However, to her surprise, she's already been there before. She time traveled back at a different point and had a whole life there, but doesn't remember any of it. And so this puts her in danger since she already knows the community. And during the time where she had been there previously in 1951 and left, there was a suspicious death, and they think that she was potentially involved because she, like, abruptly in the middle of the night left right after this person died. So we kind of follow this murder mystery. We find her meeting family members that have died long before she was born, and she gets to bond with them and talk to them. And we have like a love story there. She falls in love in this timeline as well. My thoughts, this is a great book. This is a great magical realism book. We have time travel, we've got love, we've got a murder mystery. It was engaging and the vibes were immaculate. It was really well done. I loved our main character, June. I thought she was great. I loved seeing her self-discovery and her new hope after thinking that she was going crazy for such a long period of time, and think that that was the only future for her. I will say this was a slow start, but once we get into the time travel portion, it winds up picking up and it was hard to put down. Okay, so number 4 is A Fire Endless. I love this book. I love this series. It is the second book in a duology. In the first book, we follow our male main character as he's coming home to the Isle of Cadence from the mainland, due to a desperate plea from the leader of the East, who says that all of these girls on the Isle of Cadence are going missing. So unlike the mainland, this Isle of Cadence is a magical place. Gossip gets carried in the wind. You can weave enchantments into magical clothing, and then these elemental beings kind of act like gods for the people, where they dictate the land and kind of the goings on in town. In the first book, Jack and Adara, who were once childhood rivals, grow closer as they are kind of solving this mystery of what's going on with the girls. But in book 2, we see them separated into the East and the West, which are two like warring parts of the Isle of Cadence. So the two find themselves seeking answers kind of like simultaneously to this plague that is infecting the land. They have to learn hard truths about the communities that they're in, and then also answer to a really angry spirit who wants complete power over the entire island. My thoughts, I freaking love this series. It is great. Ooh, it is so great. I loved it. I want to read it over and over and over again. I love the magic system. I love the way they separated it. So in one side of the island, they have plenty of resources, but magic is a really taxing thing to produce, and whenever they perform it, it's really, really draining. While on the other side, they have an abundance of magic. However, it is a very harsh environment that's hard to live in. I like how this book goes deeper into the lore and the politics than the first book did. It made it feel like a really fleshed out fantasy series. And I love the characters. I love the main characters, and I really even liked the side characters, Torin and Sidra, probably just as much as the main characters. So I just thought that it was really enjoyable from every perspective, and it was really well done. This book gives deep, like, folksy fairy tale vibes with the, like, Scottish flair. I think that some people might find it slow or boring. I read this with a friend and she wasn't crazy about it, but for me it was perfect. Okay, and finally, my favorite, most recent fantasy read was kind of a surprise. I didn't know what to expect, but that is What the River Knows by Isabel Ibañez. It is a young adult book that is the first in a duology. This book starts in Buenos Aires, and it follows our female protagonist, Inez, who lives with her aunt and her cousins in a very upper-class dwelling. Her parents are in Egypt, and they're kind of treasure hunters and explorers. And although she's desperate to join them, they want her to stay where she is and have this aristocratic upbringing and kind of become a socialite. When Inez receives news that her parents have unfortunately died in a tragic accident, she's devastated. She runs away to Egypt in search of answers and hopefully to find her new guardian, which is her uncle. When she gets there, her uncle wants to send her right back around. She's not even greeted by him. She's greeted by his assistant, Wit. And she evades him. She finds a place to stay. And she is on this quest to meet her uncle and get answers. Her uncle is an archaeologist who is in search for magical artifacts. Now, she eventually wins him over and joins him as an artist, doing sketches of the places he is visiting and, you know, exploring. In that way, they have this visual record of everything that they've seen. When she's in these old sites, she feels this pull of old magic that was initially imparted into her by this ring that had been previously owned by Cleopatra, that her dad sent before his mysterious death. In Egypt, she finds adventure, betrayal, and romance with the very handsome Wit. And I just loved this book. It's kind of like Indiana Jones meets the Mummy, and I don't know about you guys, but I love the Mummy. I loved the Mummy as a kid growing up. Brendan Fraser was my celebrity crush. Whew. I love the setting. I think it's so fun, kind of a blast from the past, and like such vivid, lush details in Egypt at the time of discovery. I thought the romance was so cute. I thought the story was so captivating from start to finish. I know some people complain that the main character is too naive, but I mean, she's a kid who has only lived a socialite life. I mean, I just don't expect her to be the most street smart girl in the world. And aside from that, there was just a little bit of unexpected violence at the end that came out of the blue, and to me was just kind of sad. But overall, fabulous book, 10 out of 10 would recommend. Thank you guys so much for joining me. This has been a lot of fun for me. I hope it was fun for you. If you have any thoughts about my reviews or about the books in general, please leave them below. Let me know if you guys are reading anything good. And if you want to follow along, please subscribe, and I'll see you soon.